Salam everyone, welcome to the Samovar Network. This is our first call of 2016. My name is Noura. I am a PhD candidate residing in Durham, and I will be your moderator for the evening. I'm just taking over for Omar for this conversation. We are going to have a really exciting program tonight. For folks that have watched before, the Samovar Network began this summer, and it's really highlighting the issues. And one of the things we've been most proud about is highlighting the conversation around people and communities that aren't necessarily discussed within the Afghan diaspora. And sort of continuing in that light, tonight's discussion is going to be discussing the role of religious minorities in Afghanistan, with a particular focus on the role of Afghan Shia. And we will begin by introducing the awesome panelists we have, and then after that, kick off the conversation. So I will start with Jawad Jan.
Bismillah. Salam everyone, my name is Jawad, and I'm from the greater New York City area. I live in New Jersey. I am a Shia Muslim, and I also serve as a chaplain in the community. Right now I work as a resident hospital chaplain. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next.
Go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Rashid Salim. I'm located in the Bay Area. I think a little tidbit about me was posted on the event page, and I'm really excited to be part of today's Samovar Network.
Ali?
Salam everyone, my name is Ali. I am a writer and historian and PhD candidate at UCI, and I'm honored to be joining everyone here.
Gina?
Salam everyone. My name is Gina. I am from Orange County, finishing up my master's degree in biostatistics. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. And Afifa?
Assalamu alaikum everybody. My name is Afifa. I'm from San Diego, California. I'm a community college counselor, and I'm currently pursuing a license in professional clinical counseling. And that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Great. So we just wanted to kick off the conversation just asking what have folks' experiences been, particularly those that are part of religious minority group. Can you share a little bit about that?
I can start.
Great.
All right, so as far as my experience as I guess I could say as a Shia minority, as an Afghani one, I'm first generation, so I was born in New Jersey actually, and I think I've been fortunate enough to have my community be actually mostly Shiis. So for the great majority of my childhood, adolescence, I was surrounded by many Shi'i Muslims. So I kind of saw myself as the majority, so to speak. It wasn't until perhaps I got into college where I started experiencing those who were different, the Sunnis, everyone. And and for me, my journey towards Islamic chaplaincy helped me to discover the diversity within our vast Islamic tradition. And I've been able to also experience the other diversity amongst the world's religions and spiritualities. Traveled quite a bit, saw a lot, it's changed me as a person. And so, being a minority also helped me to connect with other minorities as well, and try to be sensitive towards those on the margins of society. And so I could share a little bit more, but I think for now, I think that's a little just for how my experience has been as a, so to speak, a minority.
Great, thank you. Rashid had, I wondered if Rashid, you wanted to speak a little bit about just the meaning of being Shi'i and its place within Islam, and then that might contextualize how identity plays into this as well.
Sure, thank you, Nora John. So I think one of the common misunderstandings, both within the West and also within Muslim circles, is as to the exact meaning of Shia or Shi'i and its place within the larger context of Islam and Sunni Islam in particular. So the historical meaning of Shia is derived from the Arabic word which means follower, partisan, or supporter of, and it's shortened form of Shi'atun Ali, or the partisans or followers of Ali ibn Abi Talib, commonly known as Imam Ali, historically, both within the entire Ummah of Islam. Now, what it means in particular, though, is that immediately, both during the time of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his, and post the Prophet's departure from this temporary world, there was created, or there existed, a group of individuals who had a proclivity or a particular admiration for his grandson, his cousin, his son-in-law, excuse me, and his cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib. And the historical separation that took place, without getting too deep into the polemics or meta-polemics of its history, refer to the group of individuals, both within the Sahaba of the Prophet and others, who said that after the Prophet's passing away, the Muslim Ummah, the Muslim community, should adhere to Ali and the Prophet's household as both the spiritual and political leaders of the community. So the general understanding and acceptance of all Muslims and a requirement of Islam is that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his, is the seal of the prophets, no more prophethood after him. However, with respect to the spiritual necessities of the Muslim community, that question was still there. Who does the Muslim community, in its infancy in a way, look to clarify and to elucidate some of the newer issues that were appearing within the context? So that's essentially a quick abbreviation of the historical precedence of Shi'is, its meaning, and I really want to clarify one thing which I think is important within the Western context, that being that erroneously some people look at the Shi'i-Sunni dynamics as being akin to Protestant Catholic dynamics within the Christian faith, and that's not the case, because this distinction appeared innately within Islam, as I noted, during the time of the Prophet, according to historical sources, and immediately as the Prophet lay in his deathbed. So the comparison that the Shi'is and Sunnis are these two groups who have been added perennially, or that they are akin to Catholics and Protestants, is really misplaced.
Thank you. I want to return to that after this question, because I know I'd love to hear, Ali John has some insight that I'd like to get on this topic as well. But before we continue on that thread, though, I wanted to return to Jawad's comments on his experience growing up in New Jersey, and wondered, Afifa, if you would mind speaking about your experience growing up within the Muslim community, and if it looked similar to Jawad's or different, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I also grew up in a Shia background as well. And in my experience, I did attend a Shia mosque, and there was a smaller community within the Muslim community, in San Diego as well. But I would say that overall, my experience has been that there's more of a limited access to Shia communities in the broader, Muslim context as well, and that I often felt disconnected from the broader community. In an already small group of Afghan immigrants in the U.S., that being part of a Shia minority within that group, I felt was, just a little bit more limiting in some ways. I also found that it was sometimes challenging within that dynamic that, in the broader American society, that, I often was, charged to explain or be kind of an ambassador for Islam and, to clarify misconceptions. But then I found that I also had to do that within the Muslim community as well, to clarify or explain what being Shia is, what that meant for me. That there are a lot of misconceptions, and I found out as well that I do like to challenge a lot of generational issues that I feel come with being Shia as well. That there are a lot of generational understandings, from our parents' generation and beyond, that maybe are different for us as well. And I think that those come, as part of the conversation as well, as part of this conversation. I had even people when I was going through college, I had, other Afghans tell me, oh, you're Afghan, but you're Shia, like that's not really possible, or you know, um, just being like Kandari as well. And so, there was a lot of challenging of that, well, there are no Shias in Kandar, and how could that be? And, so a lot of, again, going through the explanation process and already kind of feeling, that there was some type of othering at times, just in the broader Muslim community. But not always. I mean, there's also a lot of welcoming, a lot of mutual understanding. But I did find that I had some of those experiences in the mix as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone want to respond to that? Because I was curious about what you said about misconceptions and was wondering if other folks could speak on what misconceptions have come up within the Afghan community about being Shia and Afghan, and also the generational bit. You said that there's sort of the is this? I wonder if Afghan, like the folks in our generation, handle the conversation different than our parents' generation, particularly within the diaspora. I see you nodding your head, Ali. Can I take that as an offer to share your insight?
Happy to. I was nodding along in agreement. I think if there's one reaction that is relatively consistent, no matter the religious minority or the background, in that there's a great deal of information about various groups within Islam and often about Islam itself within the community. And this leads to knee-jerk responses, reactions, and impressions about people. So you often see people say things like, well, and obviously I'm generalizing, but one of the experiences, for example, I've had, I remember a friend of mine once, we were talking about Sunni and Shia differences, and he said, well, don't Shias think Ali is the prophet? And it's a misconception that he doesn't know where he heard it from or where he learned it, but he believed in it. And this is someone in the diaspora. So I think the number one consistent in this case is always misinformation. It's about not knowing enough, and more importantly, not being willing to learn. So having these impressions and reactions about groups of people within our community, regardless whether they're minorities or whether they're Shia, Sufi, or any other type of religious minority, and having a kind of knee-jerk response to that and then being unwilling to change those perceptions. This becomes particularly problematic generationally. I think the older generation very much so is set in a certain way of thinking about people. And the younger generation, whilst also misinformed, may be a little bit more open to that. And so it comes to people who are activists and people who are willing to spread information to take active steps of addressing misinformation and ignorance and really opening up dialogue.
Go ahead, Jawad.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to respond also to your question about the intergenerational aspect of things, and I'm going to speak a little bit more personally in order to give a little more color. So my experience has been in listening to the stories of my parents who came as refugees to America, I think in 1981, and they were Shiis. So from hearing from their experience when they first came, they had a bit more of a they were able to bond a lot more closely with their neighbors, whether they were Sunni or Shia, particularly Afghans. I think that when they came here, they were looking for bonds, a network, a community, and that happened for a little bit until the population got a lot bigger, right? And then after we did that, we developed this mosque in about 1988, 1987, and it's been there for about like 25 years or so, a little bit more than that. And that's our Shia mosque that we have in Patterson. So that made our community a little bit more insulated as a result of that. You know, they were together, they had, they visited different places, and then they had their own mosques now. As I grew up, intergenerationally, the way that we spoke about the differences between the Afghans who were Sunni or Shia, it was when my parents, the way they spoke about things was that they had friends who were Sunnis, and they had a good time with things. It was just that as our community got larger, they started being around, those who are like themselves a little bit more. Today, when I speak about when I'm witnessing the developments in my community, I do find that there is a little shift with people wanting to assert their Shia Afghani identity. And sometimes it's a bit concerning as a chaplain for me, because sometimes I see a little more arrogance coming out, a bit more exclusivism coming out. And I think that access to more knowledge, perhaps through the internet and stuff like this, kind of encourages that. So, and with regards to my parents too, they might not, or people in their generation, they may not be able to access information like I can or others can in my age bracket. So, the dialogue isn't like mine, isn't like my peers who are chaplains. Who, it's a very different conversation. It's a different conversation. Yeah. All right. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you, Jawad John. I'll return to, you said something about asserting identity, and I'm curious to hear more about that later. I will turn to Gina to sort of continue about talking about her experience, and I'm hoping to return to the identity point, because I think that's a really important question for us all to deliberate on as well.
Thank you, Nura John. So my background is a little bit different than the panelists. I actually have, so my dad's family is Sunni. Sorry. My mom's family is Shia, so I grew up in like a sushi household, if you want to call it that. But as a kid, I didn't know what sectarian differences were. Like I remember we would be in the car and my mom would say some du'as. And so like we just memorized that, and du'as that like I didn't hear in Sunday school growing up, and I found out later that I was like what the difference was when I was in 5th grade, and one of my classmates who found out I was Muslim asked me if I was Sunni or Shia, and I had no idea what the two words meant, so I went home and I asked my parents, but it was never really enforced on us as kids because my parents didn't want to confuse us. So it's very interesting. I find that from what I've heard from my mom's side of the family, they were kind of not persecuted per se, but treated kind of as second-class citizens at times in Afghanistan, like my grandfather and great-grandfather, or my great-uncle, because their names are Hassan and Hussein, would have a harder time finding a job, for example. And I guess when they would have like international type of fellowships and scholarships, the Shia students were the bottom priority, or they wouldn't get them. Or if you're al-Numra, like my mom was al-Numra, and they'd find out she was Shia, and they're like, what? That's not possible. Like, how could a Shia be al-Numra? But I found that in my family, it's not really like there's no tension, which is nice, but I can't speak for everyone's experience. But I was going to say that I've had to kind of clear up some misconceptions, and maybe we can touch upon some of those in this discussion too, like specifically with like Muharram and some of the traditions that go along with that.
Yeah, thank you. I think we should definitely return to that after this, because that's a really important part of it, particularly for our viewers, because a lot of folks, this is something that's new to them as well. Rashid John, you had something you wanted to add?
Sure, thank you. To kind of reference some of the points which were mentioned with respect to the misunderstandings or the misperceptions that exist within both the younger generation and then some individuals back home, and where do they stem from, right? Is it due to a lack of reading, or is it actually a sort of dynamic or a sort of, if I may, a hegemony with respect to Islamic knowledge that's perpetuated both from the minbar and from the allowed books? So when we look at the misconceptions and misinformation with respect to the Shia, we see that they take a very historical approach. So the common historical accusations which have been laid against the Shi'is reappear at different stages up until our current times. Key amongst them is the actual formation of the Shi'i school of thought. stating that the Shi'i school of thought was created as a political cohort to break down the Islamic Ummah and the Khilafat by a Jew by the name of Abdullah ibn Saba from Yemen. This individual, and I don't have to sort of reference what the accusation of a Jew within the Islamic political writings means, right? So if a Jew from Yemen created this school of thought by the name of Shias to essentially weaken and destroy Islam, for most people that's enough. And you'll see this if you currently watch or follow Arab satellite stations, particularly from the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, and within Egypt. This type of accusation is something that is prominent and consistently repeated. That's number one. Number two that lines with that is that the Shi'is reject the Quran, that they have a different Quran. And that, again, obviously within the Islamic context is blasphemy and takes these individuals outside of the realm of Islam. Number three is that the Shi'is believe that the prophethood should have been given to Ali and not the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, those three main things, regardless of some of the other smaller subsets of accusations that may be in place, are sufficient for most individuals to generate a conceptualization of the Shi'i as not only the other, but as a group completely outside of the Islamic realm, A, and B, as being a detriment or obviously noxious to the Islamic community's success, to the point where you often hear that the Shi'is are more dangerous to the Islamic Ummah than Zionists in Israel. So you can kind of see the magnification of some of the Shi'i or the anti-Shi'i polemics that exist within not just Afghanistan but the larger Islamic countries. Now, with respect to Afghanistan, the Shi'i treatment and placement has taken a number of different stages. So if we look at some of the groups within Afghanistan who have Shi'i followers, and that exists for the Hazaras, that exists for the Tajiks, Pashtuns, Uzbeks, all these different groups have Shi'is within them, right? So one of the misunderstandings is that only Iranians are Shi'is, or Shi'is are non-Arabs, and these are all false. The majority of Muslim countries have a Shi'i presence. For example, Saudi Arabia has an organic Shi'i presence. Bahrain has a majority Shi'i population, which is currently under occupation by the Saudis, Pakistanis, and a foreign installed government. Lebanon has a Shi'i majority population. Iraq has a Shi'i majority population. Azerbaijan has a Shi'i majority population. India, Pakistan have sizable Shi'i populations, and so forth, without getting really long into it. But within Afghanistan, you see that the Hazaras have essentially received the blunt of anti-Shi'i sentiment, to the point where Hazara women were sold off as slaves at one point within Afghanistan. And then beyond that, though, there did exist camaraderie and understanding and very good relationships between Shi'is and Sunnis. There are known Shi'i areas within Kabul, such as Chindawal, Wazir Akbar Khan, and other areas. Now, up until 1979, this relationship really stood intact. Post-1979, historically within the Muslim Ummah, a pro-Shi'i, pro-Iranian sort of sentiment took place, wherein the Iranian Revolution really presented itself not as a Shi'i revolution. If you look at the writings of some of the intellectuals of that revolution, such as Shahid Mutahhari, Ayatollah Khomeini, and others, Ali Shariati, but it presented itself as an Islamic revolution, which was creatively unique, to the point where the positive influence of a organic, dynamic Mardumi revolution took hold at such faraway places as Tunisia, wherein if you look at the writings of Mahmoud Ghanouchi, who was the leader of the liberal or Islamic sort of democratic party, looks to Ayatollah Khomeini as an influence, as a positive influence. Now, what that did, though, was it really scared some of the dictatorships within the Muslim community, Saudi Arabia and so forth, where they now rehashed these anti-Shi'i sentiments, such as the Shi'i school was brought up by Abdullah ibn Saba and so forth, and that has now taken its way to our current situation.
Great, thank you for that. I wanted to get any young's thoughts on this real quick. Sort of like. I think there's two things we're talking about much when you give context to the historical where why we have cars and communities now, which is really helpful to get both. So, Ali, I'll switch it to you. That's.
I'm so sorry, there's just a little bit of static. I'm not sure if it was my mic, but if you could just repeat what it is that where we're headed.
So I'm curious to hear about two things. We can continue discussing sort of the context of the history, or move back towards the misconceptions, because there are misconceptions that society has, but I also believe internally that our communities have. And I'm curious to get a sense of both. So we can go both ways. Curious to get your perspective on one or the other.
Thanks, Nurjan. I think I have where we're headed with this. I think it's a very important question, and historical context is very important. I agree with what was said previously, that there is, especially because I want to focus on Afghanistan and not just the wider Muslim community, especially in Afghanistan, there has been quite a bit of a long history of pluralism and groups getting along quite well. What we need to remember is that historically, sectarianism is rooted in anxieties about power and privilege, and the fear of the fear of the loss of that power, and that difference is almost always promoted via political and social anxiety. So there's something going on politically, something going on socially, and then religious difference is put forth as a sort of explanation or justification for whatever actions are taken in response to that. For example, the treatment of the Hazaras is often tied to a certain memory of the Hazaras as being so-called foreign, or the invasion of other people into Afghanistan. Even the name Hazara has a very historical meaning. So rightly or wrongly, whether it's historically accurate or not, it's part of this memory of foreignness that then gets exacerbated within certain political situations. Now, a slight correction about the geopolitics, I should say. While the Iranian Revolution was very important and exacerbated the geopolitics between Sunnism and Shiism as sectarian, especially considering that the Islamic Revolution was seen as a threat to the Saudi regime, the Sunni Salafi Saudi regime's claim of being an Islamic nation. The tensions between Sunni and Shias in Afghanistan actually starts a couple decades earlier with the rise of Marxist and Maoist groups within Afghanistan, of which Shias found some resonance with, because these political affiliations were very big on promoting equality, on promoting change, radical change within the government. So we see that right back to the original, my point is that it's almost always some form of political and social anxiety that promotes these type of religious tensions. In reality, the theological differences simply aren't compelling enough, or a big deal, or a central issue for this type of violence. It's almost always political and social.
Thank you. I wanted to turn to Afifa to sort of, so now we have a sense of the broader context. And is my mic working? Let me just take a moment and ask folks if you can hear me better now. Great. So we're getting a sense of sort of the context, right? But back to the community in terms of our daily interactions, I wanted to get Afifa's take of what this looks like in terms of misconceptions that come up in conversation within communities.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to speak a little bit more on that. I think kind of like on a daily basis in a lived experience, I think a lot of the misconceptions about Shias or what Shias practice or believe, I've heard a variety of things, right? Like that, that Shias pray to a rock. I had somebody ask me that, within the Afghan community once, and, or that, I think as Rasha John mentioned, that we commit shirk, right? That we place partners beside God, or again, kind of clarifying that misconception of, who is Shia, right? Are we all Azara, not? I think that that's actually quite a big misconception. And I think one is also that we're a homogenous group. I mean, we speak about the diversity in the Muslim community regularly, but there's also a lot of diversity in the Shia community. There are different sects, perceptions on Shiism as well. That range, and I think some of our house historians can speak on that probably much better than I can. But those are a little bit. There are even things like we pray differently, or Muharram, that everybody is into self-flagellation and things like that, right? Those are a lot of the main misconceptions, at least that I've experienced, and that I find the need to clarify and explain as well. So maybe Joel can also address that a little bit more based on his experiences.
Yes, I have a few anecdotes I'd like to share. Just really, I think it might help to bring this to a head. I mean, so there was some good historical context. I think that was really helpful for this, and just a bit about the ramifications of it. So I remember when I was leading the Muslim Student Association at my university as their president, and I had led prayer, and I was with one of my Sunni friends who's Palestinian. After I finished the prayer, I think I walked out. I don't know what I was going to do. Um, there was a person who approached him. I was praying with my arms open. I think I must have had a napkin on the ground because we pray to something. We place our head on something that's made from earth. And my friend had his arms closed, and the person approached him afterwards, and he said to him, "How could you pray with him? He's not Muslim." And my friend, he was baffled. He told me, but the person said, he's not Muslim. How could you pray with him? He's a Shi'i. And when my friend shared this with me, I was like, I didn't say how could he do that. I said, how did you respond? And my friend said, what do you mean he's not Muslim? Yeah, he is. And it was just an interesting. That was one of the first experiences I had in college, and some years back. And there was another incident too, not so much on misconceptions, but on some things about how a little bit of clarification could go a long way. So when I was at Fairfield University, there as a Muslim chaplain there, again, prayer, I was leading prayer, but in this turn, the advisor for the Muslim Student Association there, he told me, he's like, Jawad, when you lead the Jummah prayers, do you think you'd be able to, just let them know some things in case so that the students aren't too confused? And I said, yeah, of course I would do that. I mean, if I think it need be. And he said the reason being is that there was a Muslim chaplain that was there the year before, and he was Shia as well. And when he led the prayers, the students were confused. There was just there were some things during the prayer that the Shiis do that are a little bit different from Sunnis, and the person just didn't clarify them, and so this led to some confusion for the students. I think they completed their prayers and they were like, "What just happened here?" Because the person, that's just what happened, and I was in a place where I led the prayers that I didn't need to do that clarification, but the advisor to the Muslim Student Association shared that just a simple conversation, just saying to them that this is how we do things, would have helped in the students' understandings. And yeah, I think that that's one example of the applied misconceptions, some things that have affected us, like in terms of people telling me that I'm not Muslim, the pan-Islamic identity and the ideologies that spread towards the different lands. I mean, they gave a good context before. And as far as just raising of awareness, speaking, and having a true conversation about what's going on, really helps to lessen the anxieties. And the anxieties and assertion, feelings, I'd like to touch on this a little later. I do see that these really do impact so much of the conversations. So I'll touch on that a little later, but that's what I wanted to add for now.
Thank you so much. I'm curious, how does that leave a burden on folks that come from a dominant So if you're Shia or any other religious minority, is it a burden on you when, I think of it as, I'm curious when I hear you speak about this, that one, people are questioning you being Muslim to begin with. And then two, then it leaves this conversation where there's this burden for you to explain, right? So how do you grapple with that? Because I feel like, and is that stressful? Because it almost feels like when we're, minorities in America, right? When we're talking as a Muslim to someone that's white and does not understand Islam, it almost parallels that same experience, but internally within a Muslim community, which should theoretically be your safe space. And then suddenly someone is saying I feel it calls into question whether the space is safe or not when they're questioning whether or not it's almost like saying, do you belong or not, right? So then how does that make you feel, and how do you handle those tensions is something I'm curious to hear more about. Gina, is this something you wanted to touch about, especially because you come in from both traditions, so I'm curious to hear what your perspective on this.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Just in terms of these, the experiences that Jawad brought up about people being confused when they see prayer, or then even asking, is this person Muslim, right? Have you heard those kind of comments before? And then do you feel like this burden to have to answer? Like, does this place an additional burden upon you to sort of be this ambassador for, well, like, actually speaking on behalf of XYZ tradition, right?
So I've been to places, like different masjids, for example, where like my mom will be with me, and during namaz Jama, like she prays this waz, and so people have made comments before, and so I'm quick to kind of like jump in and defend and say, actually there's a lot of similar things between the way Sunnis and Shias pray. Maybe Rashid John can touch upon this.
Sure, thank you, Gina John. You went dark. Everything okay? All right. It's interesting to note that within the Afghan popular culture, Shi'ism, which essentially is a pro-Ahlul Bayti or pro-prophetic family sort of orientation, is really seeped within the popular consciousness. I'll give you a couple of examples. A slight correction to the earlier point. When we look at the communist parties, the Khalq and the Parchamis, we see that though there were individuals from Shi'i families and Shi'i backgrounds who participated, there did not appear within those parties leaders which the wider Shi'i community looked towards. Conversely, we look at the example of Allama Sayyid Ismail Balkhi, who led the first religiously inspired revolt against the government in Afghanistan, and his calls, if you study both his poetry and writings, is a pan-Islamic or pan-Shi'i call towards revolution, which includes both Shi'is and Sunnis. One of the earlier victims of anti-government uprisings were the major Shi'i ulamas of Kabul. For example, Ayatollah Sayyid Waiz, extremely popular. So within the Afghan culture, you see that both within Kabul, within Mazar, where the shrine of Hazrat Ali, there's some sort of distinction there. You have Sunnis and Shi'is coming to the 10th of Muharram, including kings, which is actually taking place even to this day. Recently, with the last Muharram and Ashura, you saw Ashraf Ghani going to a Shi'i masjid for commemorations. This also takes place in Mazar, where people make halwa and they pass it out, and they go and they have that. And that ties in intrinsically to the Sufi traditions, both within the literary tradition and then also within the tariqas. One of the accusations against the Sufis has been that the Sufis are pseudo-Shi'is. So these type of things are definitely there within Afghan culture. Now, some of the common accusations that the Shi'is pray differently and so forth really stemmed from, again, a lack of understanding and misinformation, which, though it can be used and implied for political gains, theological arguments are used for it. Praying with your hands open, or sadl in Arabic, is not just a Shi'i thing. Within the Maliki mazhab, within the Shafi'i mazhab, sadl is employed, and even for some of our Sunni and Shi'i listeners, there's a very popular talk on YouTube by Hamza Yusuf, which talks about this. Or, for example, Shi'is, it's mustahab or recommended to make qunut or dua on the second rak'ah of prayer, which again, if there's a talk on YouTube by very popular Sunni scholars such as Numan Ali Khan and Omar Sulaiman, which talk about the presence of that with the prophetic tradition. So I think what's important to understand is that the Shi'i dynamic, the Shi'i theological presence, is not something, again, which is foreign to the Sunni madhab. In other words, the Sunni madhab has no sort of intrinsic superiority when it comes to its creation and its existence over the Shi'i madhab as well. This is something which I think is important to note, that we have to look at both the Shi'is and Sunnis as both being organically and intrinsically Muslim. And I think that's important. Once that's understood and really extensive research and sort of a meta-polemical look is applied, then we'll see that some of these accusations and misunderstandings are really misapplied.
Right. So pointing to that, organically, that this one question that came up on Facebook was whether we feel that Afghans, young adults, so let's say our generation, 18 to 30 younger, are these misconceptions as rampant within our generation as they were for our parents? Is it worse? How does that look? And I wanted to get folks' thoughts on that. Jawad, did you want to take that one?
Oh, yeah, okay. So sure. So, I mean, we have a few paradigms that I think many immigrants they might face when they come to America. The way I see it is that there's an isolationist, assimilationist, and integrationist kind of paradigm that they might come into America with, and I'll leave you guys to understand those three words. I think they're self-explanatory for now, because I want to get down to the point. As far as actually, Nura, can you please repeat the last part of the question?
Sure. How does this look for young adults in terms of these misconceptions and the rampantness of it? Within our parents' generation, there is a generational difference, and since you deal as a chaplain with young students, right? I think that you can touch on that really well.
Right. So regarding the three that I just mentioned, integrationist, assimilationist, and isolationist, I think in the context of families, many of those three ways are ways I think that that we deal with difference, and how do we deal with the difference? So, for instance, if they're in an isolationist paradigm, perhaps the families and the community won't look at difference all that well. They'll become insular, and they might distance themselves a little bit more. And as far as the assimilationists, they may be like, well, we're American, let's just do what Americans do. We might speak the same language a little bit, but maybe not. Let's just speak more English. We'll just do things that we'll just eat a whole bunch of American food, so to speak. We can just celebrate Christmas. Let's have a Christmas tree in our living room. I'm going to a bit of an extreme here. And then integrationist, I think, is more of like a combining of identities. I find myself someone who's, look what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a sweater with a little shirt here. I'm integrated. I'm not wearing a pit and tamban, so to speak. I'm both Afghan and American, and I'm also Muslim. So I think that for young adults, depending on how the families are, how the communities are conceptualizing their identity and how they live, so and these three paradigms will affect how they then experience themselves. And I think I was fortunate to be with a family that celebrated both these identities, and I was able to reflect on this a little bit more as I integrate to become to have an integrated integrationist kind of model. I hope that I answered that, but I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm curious, I can get your thoughts or other panelists' thoughts. So when we talk about identity, and I think part of it is qualifying that religious observance may play a role in this, depending on if you go to the masjid or not. It may affect whether you see yourself as Muslim first, or Afghan first, or American first. But then even on the Muslim question, should people say they're Shia when people ask, and I'm Sunni, or should we answer as Muslim? How do you feel about that conversation when folks ask you, what are you when it comes to religious tradition? Afifa, would you like to take that on, or?
Yeah, most definitely. I think I think it kind of ties up to the previous question that was posed on Facebook, on the Facebook. In terms of what the trends or kind of norms that I see in the younger generation, our generation, the first and second generations here as well. And I do see a shift in terms of the identity of being Shia or Sunni doesn't seem to have it doesn't seem to be as salient to our identities in the United States, as being American Muslims. I don't think that it carries the same geopolitical power, socioeconomic power as it did, in Afghanistan in terms of, like Gina mentioned, opportunity, lack of opportunity, repression, oppression, right? That was very overt. That my parents experienced, my grandparents experienced, my great grandparents experienced. Those are stories and narratives that I grew up hearing as well. And even myself, I tend to refer to myself as Muslim, but I do think that it kind of is a question of uniformity versus conformity, that I think that unity, and kind of presenting ourselves as one ummah and being part of one ummah is extremely powerful and really vitally necessary. But I don't think that comes at the cost of conformity, right? And I think that can be a possibility, right, or potentially like a con. Would be, a loss of diversity and a loss of differing values and practices of minority groups and not just Shias, right? And I do think that oftentimes with that process of conformity, again, not unity, but the process of conformity, I think that can bring with it a loss of historical memory and a loss of the memory of oppression, a loss of the struggles that many of these groups have experienced, again, not just Shias, right? And so I would say that it is a positive thing. It is a positive thing, and it's definitely done that, it is possible to be united as one ummah, and not that there are no differences, but to be united despite differences or despite differences in practice, I think is really important. And that's a trend that I see and that I absolutely love, in the Muslim American community in our generation that I see as well.
Thank you. I think the unity versus conformity is a really powerful statement. I know, Jawad, you wanted to mention something on that real quick? Or Rashid, did you want to jump in here?
Sure. Very briefly. So I have, I guess, the unique situation where I'm engaged both with the Shi'i and Sunni centers. So it's both a good thing and then it's a bad thing in the context that I'm not Shi'i enough or I'm not Sunni enough for certain individuals. And I'll leave whether I'm Shi'i or Sunni to the imagination, because I think what's important, again, is when we classify ourselves as Muslims or Shi'is or Sunnis, we have to understand the context. In particular, that there are individuals who are intent on this separation being magnified and highlighted, and that's really used for very ulterior and vile political aims within the Middle East. So that has to be understood, number one. Number two, as Afifa John mentioned, that what is meant by unity, right? There is no such thing as uniformity within the Muslims, whether it's within the Sunni schools of thought or within the Shi'i school of thought. So that is uniformity in the context that we all believe the exact same thing when it comes to the very furu or the branches of faith. We have differences in fiqh and jurisprudence. However, when it comes to the usul, then we have absolute similarities with respect to the oneness of God, the validity of the Quran, the end of prophethood, halal and haram, and all these things are valid. Now, with respect to minor variances with regards to applications, such as hands open or certain fiqhi things, when we look and we compare the 5 schools of thought, and the schools of thought were much more than the 5 that currently exist, we see that there is agreement between, for example, the Shi'i madhab and the Shafi'i madhab on one issue, and disagreement with the Hanafi, Maliki, and so forth. And this kind of varies itself. So you see that when it comes to the jurisprudential component, there is a lot of understanding and a lot of cooperation that takes place. Now, at the same time, as being the khatib at the Islamic Cultural Center of Northern California, during Jum'ah prayers, for example, we have both Shi'is and Sunnis come to prayers. And I think that's very unique. And one of the things that I try to highlight is the importance of maintaining this presence of both Shi'is and Sunnis praying together, right? Because I think one of the odd things that the Muslim community does is we reach out to, for example, Christians and Jews and other faith groups, but we're not doing a lot of reaching out internally, which I think is something that is vital for us to take place, where you have organizations saying, well, we have so much in common with Christians and Jews, we're all brothers, but at the same time, some of those same speakers will say some very vile things against the Shi'is, and that sort of
Right.
disconnect is very, very problematic.
I think we'll take a couple more comments and sort of tie in and circle in at that to conclude the conversation, because that leaves me considering where do we go from here? What are the solutions? Because if we're willing to have these conversations amongst, well, as Muslims with Jews and Christians, why not internally, to your point, Rashid John? Gina, can I get you to, I know you wanted to say a few words about how you identify, and I was curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I usually, when people ask now that I'm older, I'll just say I'm Muslim. I don't like putting a label on either, I'm Shia, Sunni, whatever. And that's not to disregard the experiences that like my mom's side of the family has endured being a Shia minority in Afghanistan. Like, I'm not trying to disregard that. My goal is to just kind of promote unity, and at the end of the day, we're all Muslim. We believe in the same God. We have the same tenets of belief, So just like growing up in a sushi household, right, where it wasn't really brought up, the differences weren't brought up. I just kind of observed. I'm kind of hopeful for our generation, because even when I was like at a Sunni Sunday school, one of my teachers would explain, because I actually asked about praying, this laws versus this basta, and my Sunni Sunday school teacher was like, the Prophet ﷺ would pray both ways. They're both fine, trying to sort of not, focus too much on the differences. So that I'm hopeful.
Thank you for that. Jawad, I know you had one other thing you wanted to add to this.
Yeah.
Which is on identity. Yes.
Yeah. With regards to identity, I'm in a very unique position in the sense that I'm really involved in the community in some sense. And so when I've led the communities and I've had multiple schools of thought, how did I identify? How did I relate? And yeah, it's a question that I've always been struggling with, and to this day I still reflect. I'm at peace I'm at peace with how I see myself, but I think it's always a journey. So with regards to how I refer to myself, I tend to refer to myself as a Muslim with a Shi'i heritage, and for me difference is important. And I think that when I was talking about feelings and anxieties and fears, so to speak, difference is what this world is made up of. I think that, and I also think that diversity is part of the mercy of God in creation. And like God says in the Quran, we have made different tribes and nations, communities, so that you may know one another. I take that to heart, and I think that difference for me is pretty important. So in some ways, by saying that I'm a Shi'i, that I am Muslim, it's helpful for the conversation. I think that that's a segue into helping to create a sense of community or a sense of dialogue where people know how to speak about difference, and that they can not always get into polemical discussions, something that's more dialogical. And at the same time, I'm pretty much sometimes people, I don't know if they can tell if I'm Shia or Sunni as well. Identity for me is it's something that it's a delicate line, and I try to balance it so that it doesn't become one of assertion and one of pride, so to speak. But it's important in some ways, because when I look for how to practice certain things or getting certain fatwas, for instance, having a source to go back to is helpful. Madhab itself is a path. The last point is that there was a conversation that happened in 2004, 2005 in Amman, Jordan, and it was called the Amman message, and Sunnis, Shi'is, Ibadis, scholars of all different kinds came together, and they said takfir is not permissible in our community. Saying that so-and-so is not a Muslim is not part of our part of what we can do. And they were responding to a lot of the climate that was there. So the conversation is already there. We need to make people aware of the fact that difference and diversity is part of the fabric of our life and part of the fabric of Islam. the Amman message from Jordan it was a big deal, and Sunnis scholars, Qardawi, Sistani, many of these scholars, they signed up on that, and I would encourage the listeners to go up and see that. If you follow them, awesome. Like you got the fatwa saying they're Muslim. Like so. That's my thoughts. Okay.
Thank you for that. As we're wrapping up now, I'm left considering what's next and how do we have these conversations beyond Samovar Network, and how do we deal with this in our communities moving forward. And I was curious to get Ali John's point of view on this.
Thank you, Nura Jan. I think the first thing we do is we start by respecting difference. We don't need to ignore. It's important to respect difference, so we don't do violence to people's histories or their lived experience, but we don't allow that difference to turn into division, because that breeds sectarianism, violence, and oppression. And that's something that the geopolitics of the region, that Orientalist framing of the way we view the Middle East would like to reclaim our knowledge. We have to open up communities, and then we have to have the courage to act. That's the only way to have real change. If any one of those factors is missing, what we have is unstable change. So it's important that we reclaim knowledge aspect, and then that we take sustainable actions, and that all three of these things work in. Dialogue is important in our community, even if it makes us uncomfortable, and then stepping up. If you see something that breeds something, have the courage to step up. This is our will thrive or fail on the merits of our actions.
Great, thank you. Afifa John?
Yeah, I also wanted to add, because I think part of the original question is, how does this implement, or how does this affect the Afghan community or the Afghan American community in our generation as well? And kind of what I hear is the general question of how do we build a more supportive community, whether that's through interrelated events like Rashid John mentioned. But I think it's also important to highlight the ongoing violence against Shia communities in Pakistan and Afghanistan, against the Hazara community. Against Shias in Kuwait, right? They're being massacred. They're being killed in really large numbers and attacked very intentionally. In part of political measures and things. And so I do think that it is really important to address that, and for the wider Muslim community to also be aware of that as well. In terms of the fact that oppression and repression is still very very alive and well. To put it in simple terms as well. And I think that it is important for our community to be aware of that and to challenge hate speech. I think that in my experience, I see a lot of hate speech, on satellite channels, etc. Right? That works to create divides or to further existing tensions, right? So I think that it is really important for our generation to challenge that. I see it; it happens all the time, and so it's one of the things that that my parents and I discuss. And I think that for our generation, it's really vital to challenge that, because it's something that it is going to continue to create fitna in our generation as well. So I think that is important to challenge that and to promote. The only time that I really see a lot of Shia-Sunni tension is when it comes to marriage in our community. And all of a sudden that becomes a really salient.
I'm not sure if Afifa's signal is not working. Rashid, can we move to you real quick, and then we can return to Afifa?
Sure, thank you. So I know we're wrapping up, so I'll keep this brief. I think it's important to note for next stages, we have to understand, to Afifa John's point, that the predominance of anti-Shi'i violence is something that the Muslim community as a whole has to address. It's really ironic when we have Muslim leaders under the banner of Sunni Islam or Shi'i Islam, for example, voice commonality and camaraderie with African American struggles with respect to Black Lives Matters. But there's no mention of the very prominent and vehement anti-Shi'i attacks that take place, suicide bombings in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq. Just today there was an attack, a bombing in Syria against the shrine of the Prophet's granddaughter, Bibi Zainab. So these type of, I think, issues is really important for us to address, wherein whether Shi'i or Sunni, I would posit and I would highlight and recommend and invite the dear listeners that anytime you listen to any scholar, whether they present themselves under Shi'i or Sunni, Sufi, whatever the title may be, if you see that they are only granting mercy and prominence to one school of thought or one people, they have not understood Islam. Very point blank. Sochao Poskanda Bagufte Afghana. That anytime you see someone calling to disunity and hatred, they have not understood the broader message of Islam, the mercy that exists within the Quran. And then secondly, they have only understood inner Muslim dynamics from a very polemical understanding. I think once Muslims as a whole, both Shi'is and Sunnis, move beyond an emotional attachment to history and look at history as an academic, as a field that needs to be prodded, that needs to be perused, then we can kind of resolve some of these misunderstandings and see that there is much more at play than what we've just absorbed and imbibed as myth and sort of this, I call it a Disney rendering of our history as a community.
Thank you.
And just to make a plug, last minute, for those in the Bay Area, we would love to kind of carry this conversation forward. So I will leave it to the participants to, inshallah, voice their interest in that.
Great. Thank you for that. I wanted to get your insight onto sort of contextualizing and bringing in the conversation beyond just the Sunni Shia framework. So if you had a few words for that.
I absolutely agree with what was said. I think our history is quite important. I don't mind a little bit of emotional attachment to history. Being a historian, being passionate about something is good, but we have to have history. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that, for example, the Sunni Shia conversation is some our present and contemporary discussion about it. And while it certainly is important, we have to be careful that that framework doesn't do violence to the realities in Afghanistan and the wider Afghan community. There are other religious minorities that exist within Afghanistan, within our community, the Sufi community, for example, as well as the Ahmadiyya community, who was in the 20th century and was faced repeated oppression, violence. So these conversations are very important to have, but these conversations are important to open up as well, and move beyond the sort of dichotomy that is being imposed on the dialogue.
Thank you. Jawad John?
Thank you. Perhaps a few things. For me, what I find to be important is a raising of awareness. One, starting with ourselves, whatever, cleansing the perceptions and being a pull from which, when we do interact with others, we can speak from a kind of awareness. And secondly, raising the awareness in discussions with others. And courage, I think, is important as well. I mean, sometimes if there is someone who's very outward, very externalized, and very forceful, sometimes it takes a bit of courage to say, I don't agree with you. But but sometimes just the fact of saying I don't agree with you is what's important. And placing it in the terms of I is really helpful in that sense, in order to claim a sense claim a sense of strength, to speak from a stance of grounding. I don't agree with you, and I think that you would need to look into things a little bit more. But we can broaden this. In any place that we see injustice, I think that this is helpful. So having awareness and speaking with courage, and so along in this framework of dialogue. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think those are powerful words to conclude the conversation with: having awareness, speaking to courage. We're really honored to have everyone part of this conversation, and we encourage everyone to continue the conversation on the Facebook events page. This should just be the beginning of this conversation. We see Samovar Network as a place to platform and highlight issues within the community as a way to continue the conversation. We thank everyone for tuning in, and if anyone has comments or would like to provide feedback, our information is on the Facebook events page as well. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.